Trump has just changed the regime in Venezuela, and it seems like he has already set his eyes on the next target, Iran. Just 1 year into Donald Trump's second presidency, Venezuela didn't just wobble, it collapsed. Nicolás Maduro wasn't pressured, persuaded, or voted out. He was captured, cuffed, and flown out under American guard. That moment matters not because of Venezuela alone, but because it exposed the machinery in motion. And history screams what comes next. The United States doesn't stop after one success. It escalates, it tests, it proves, it repeats. If Venezuela was the proof of concept, then Iran is the logical sequel. Bigger prize, higher stakes, deeper symbolism. Even the streets in Iran are being named after Trump. People of Iran should be worried, as this might just be the start of America's foreign intervention, and that is not good news in any part of the world. The playbook has been opened, the tools have been sharpened, and the signals are already flashing. So is Iran now staring down the same regime change conveyor belt? Hello and welcome. You're watching Statecraft with me, Geeta Mohan. Trump didn't stumble into Venezuela. He engineered it across phases that mirror decades of American intervention abroad. Economic isolation first, delegitimization next, covert penetration after that, then force. Once the formula worked, once Maduro was removed with minimal US casualties and oil flows resumed, the psychological barrier vanished. Venezuela became a case study, a warning shot, a message broadcast to adversaries everywhere, and Iran has been hearing that message loud and clear. From sanctions to rhetoric, from covert pressure to open threats, Tehran already sits where Caracas sat months before collapse. The only real difference is scale. Venezuela was the rehearsal. Iran could be the main stage. Trump's second presidency began not with ambiguity but with intent. On the 20th of January 2025, he signed an executive order labeling Venezuela's Tren de Aragua gang a terrorist organization, directly tying it to the Maduro regime and drug trafficking. The label itself was the weapon. Once terrorism enters the frame, everything changes. Sanctions tighten, military options widen, legal barriers evaporate. PDVSA, or Petróleos de Venezuela SA, Venezuela's oil lifeline, was squeezed harder than ever. Assets were frozen, tankers were blocked, revenue collapsed. The country's economy, already fragile, began to suffocate. This was not chaos, it was calibration. This was phase one of the American regime change playbook. Isolate, delegitimize, and economically break the target until cracks appear inside the system. While sanctions strangled Venezuela from outside, the CIA moved in quietly from within. By August 2025, intelligence teams had infiltrated Caracas, mapping Maduro's routines with chilling detail. This wasn't surveillance for negotiation. It was preparation for removal. At the same time, Washington tightened diplomatic pressure. The Organization of American States amplified opposition recognition, echoing the Juan Guaido strategy of 2019, but this time with real military muscle backing it. By September 2025, the operation turned overt. A Venezuelan vessel labeled a Tren de Aragua drug boat was sunk off the coast by a US drone or missile strike, killing 11. Trump didn't hide it. He shared the video himself. This was not just an attack, it was signaling. A warning shot wrapped in spectacle. Soon after, F-35 jets appeared in Puerto Rico. A Navy submarine loitered offshore. Then came the carrier. On 16th of November, the USS Gerald R. Ford arrived in the Caribbean with nearly 12,000 troops under Operation Southern Spear. The message was unmistakable. The noose was tightening and Caracas could see it from the horizon. On 16th of December, Trump imposed a full tanker blockade, effectively shutting Venezuela out of global energy markets. The economy collapsed further. The military splintered. The regime began to hollow out from the inside. Then came the calls. From Mar-a-Lago, Trump personally phoned Maduro between December 26th and 30th. The demand was blunt: resign, step aside, avoid what comes next. Maduro refused. History shows what happens when leaders refuse at this stage. Noriega refused in 1989, Saddam refused in 2003, Gaddafi in 2011. The outcome is never subtle. In the early hours of 3rd of January 2026, explosions rocked military sites in Caracas. At 12:46 a.m., Trump gave the green light. Delta Force breached Fort Tuna, cutting through steel defenses before Maduro could reach his safe room. He was found asleep with his wife Celia Flores. There was no last stand, no dramatic escape. He surrendered, handcuffed, extracted by helicopter. By 2 a.m., Trump had tweeted success. A photograph soon followed. Maduro aboard the USS Iwo Jima, wrists bound, regime ended. Decades of power collapsed in minutes. This was phase 4, executed with brutal efficiency. The aftermath was swift and calculated. Venezuelan military units fractured, some swearing loyalty to interim figures, others standing down entirely. A transitional government emerged, that too with US backing, and oil majors circled immediately. Chevron and others eyed contracts as production resumed. Trump framed the entire operation as a counter-narcotics victory and a reclamation of US oil land assets. Casualties were kept low. No US losses were reported. Around 100 Venezuelan guards were detained. By January 7th, transitional elections loomed. Socialism, Trump declared, was finished in Venezuela. Critics warned of Iraq-style chaos, but for now, oil flowed and Washington declared success. This wasn't improvisation, this was the American regime change playbook, refined over a century and executed with modern tools. The United States has intervened in foreign governments at least 41 times in Latin America alone between 1898 and 1994. After the Cold War, that playbook expanded globally, shifting from anti-communism to counter-terrorism, weapons of mass destruction fears, and democracy promotion. Grenada, Panama, Haiti, Afghanistan, Iraq, Libya, Syria. Venezuela fits perfectly into this lineage. Economic warfare first, covert action second, military intimidation third, direct removal last. Trump didn't invent the system. He simply used it without apology. What makes Venezuela different is not the method, but the timing. 1 year. That's all it took. This wasn't just about Venezuela. It was a message to adversaries everywhere. When Trump says he will act, he means it. And that's where Iran enters the frame. Even before Maduro's capture, pressure on Tehran was intensifying. Maximum pressure sanctions never really ended. Now, after Venezuela, the warnings grew louder. Economist Jeffrey Sachs openly feared Iran was next, calling the United States a rogue state operating beyond constitutional limits. He revealed Trump had long contemplated invading Venezuela and warned that Iran would be hotter than Venezuela.
So when Netanyahu came to Mar-a-Lago last week, just around New Year's, they made a joint statement basically saying, Iran, you're next, or you could be next. And Trump has said that with protests in Iran, if the government cracks down on the protests, we are basically locked and loaded. We're ready to fight. Well, this is clearly a typical deep state provocation. In other words, we're lining up the arguments, the human rights argument. We're going to go in and invade Iran to protect the people of Iran. This is a standard playbook. And so this is where I would expect the possibility of a real global explosion. And I would give a warning. That one will be hotter than Venezuela if it happens. It would be potentially disastrous because while Venezuela is in the American geographic neighborhood, and China and Russia don't want to take on the United States in the Western Hemisphere. Iran is in the middle of a lot of major powers, and Iran is itself with hypersonic missiles and a capacity to do a lot of harm and a lot of damage. And Israel is a nuclear armed country. All in all, it's a recipe for potential disaster. And sound heads should be saying to the United States right now, stop it. This is not a joke. This is not a game. This is not appealing to your base. This is not social media. This is not some play. This is reality, and stop it before things get out of control. Trump has threatened Iran, Mexico, Colombia, obviously Venezuela, Denmark, Nigeria in the last couple of weeks. A president of the United States making dire threats against half a dozen other countries. He's also saying that the government of Cuba is about to fall. All of this is just like lighting the fuse all over the place, and things could get really, really dangerous. And so world leaders need to wake up.
Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu's meeting with Trump at Mar-a-Lago around New Year only deepened those fears. The message, Sachs said, was blunt. Iran, you're next. Protests inside Iran, driven by currency collapse, inflation, energy shortages, and water crises, were amplified as signs of imminent regime failure. Trump himself warned that if Iran killed peaceful protesters, the United States was locked and loaded. Secretary of State Marco Rubio explicitly framed the Venezuela operation as a warning to other adversaries. The pattern was no longer subtle. China's reaction to Venezuela revealed another layer of the strategy. Beijing condemned the operation as a violation of sovereignty, but materially, its loss was significant. China had been buying around 80% of Venezuela's oil exports, much of it to service debt. With Maduro gone and US firms moving in, that supply chain is now threatened. Energy security, debt repayment, and geopolitical leverage all took a hit. Analysts warned that redirecting Venezuelan oil away from China and squeezing Iran simultaneously could severely disrupt Beijing's energy calculus. This wasn't just regime change, it was supply chain warfare. This is the core motive threading through Trump's action: oil, energy, control. By removing Maduro, Washington didn't just topple a socialist ally of China, Russia, Iran, and Cuba. It cracked a critical node in China's global energy network. If Iran were to face similar pressure, the consequences would be exponentially larger. Iran is one of China's top oil sources. Cutting it off wouldn't just punish Tehran, it would choke Beijing. In an era of great power competition, regime change becomes a tool not just of dominance, but of disruption. Inside Iran, the psychological impact of Maduro's fall was immediate. Protesters saw hope. Regime loyalists saw warning. Analysts cautioned that while protests alone might not topple the Islamic Republic, the Venezuela operation would make Tehran more cautious, more paranoid, more brittle. That is exactly how phase one of the playbook works. Destabilize without firing a shot. Let fear do half the work. Let economic pressure and internal dissent weaken the regime before any overt move. Trump's confidence after Venezuela has only grown. He openly predicted Cuba could fall next, deprived of Venezuelan oil. He framed regime collapse not as tragedy, but as inevitability. This is not a president hesitant about intervention. This is a president emboldened by speed and success. And success in this context isn't democracy or stability, it's control, access, and deterrence. Looking at the pattern, the logic is chillingly clear. Venezuela wasn't about narcotics alone. It wasn't about human rights alone. It was about oil, influence, and cutting adversaries down to size. It was about demonstrating that American power, when unleashed, is still unmatched. Trump followed the long-proven American regime change playbook step by step, compressing decades of precedent into 12 months. If that playbook now turns toward Iran, the consequences won't be regional, they'll be global. Sanctions, media narratives, covert operations, warnings, military posturing, the talk of rescue and responsibility all sound hauntingly familiar. Venezuela was the test case, the proof of concept. The question that now hangs over global politics isn't whether the United States can do it again. It's whether anyone can stop it if Iran truly is next. Thank you for watching Statecraft.